globally and Singapore, what it means for us economically, and we try to peer into the crystal ball a little bit, see what is there for us in the future in terms of economic performance, in terms of asset performance, in terms of how life would be in the new normal after COVID-19. So without a doubt, COVID-19 has been a major life transformation for most of us in Singapore. I mean, the reason why I'm speaking to you right now over Zoom and not in real life is because we are all still under circuit breaker or phase one of post-circuit breaker, if you would call it. And on a personal note, COVID-19 has been a bit closer to me than most would as well, because my wife is a nurse. There are a few close shaves where she had to go and test, but thankfully each time it came back negative. But of course, I'm not a nurse, I'm an economist. I look at a lot of other things other than just COVID-19, which I will try to give you in a holistic picture today. So if you try to recall at the start of the year, it wasn't only just COVID-19. Top left of the picture of the screen, you will see US, China. If you remember, start of this year, they were still on and off about whether to sign a trade deal. In the end, they signed it on 17th of Jan, if I'm not wrong. Boris Johnson took over as Prime Minister in the UK. There was a hot topic a few years back. And then, of course, now Boris Johnson has successfully took the UK out of the EU, pending some of the trade negotiations. So still some lingering risk over there. If you recall, at the start of the year, I remember I was on holiday for this one. While I was in China for holiday, and US and Iran decided to exchange missiles to each other over Iraq. So I think there was a point where people thought there was World War III happening. No one seems to remember that now, of course, with the whole coronavirus going on. And of course, there is always North Korea, who would add an element of unsuspected and unmotivated risk to our economic system. So as far as COVID-19 is concerned, I think no graph exemplifies the kind of supply shocks that we have faced than these two graphs here, the unemployment rate in the US. On the red graph, you see the unemployment rate in the US surging to 20%, a bit shy of that according to last Friday's data. I did these graphs on Wednesday, so a bit outdated there. And on your right, the black graph, you see the initial jobless claims, which means the first time people file for unemployment benefits, surging to about 7 million in a single week, from a normal 200 to 250,000 a single week. So when you look at these two graphs, right, it threw us out of balance, and there's a reason why asset markets cannot understand how to price in this. When you look at such a graph, there is no way you are ever going to plot a proper graph in future when you have a straight line up like this. From now on, all my graphs on unemployment in the US will look like a stable ocean before COVID-19. COVID-19 is a huge mountain, and then post-COVID-19, it will become a stable ocean again. That will mean that for most of us economists and analysts, we have to redraw our models and rethink of how we want to see the unemployment picture, as well as how to model shocks in our performances. So what has the cost of COVID-19 been for the world? For IMF, they are looking at a 3% recession. To contextualize what 3% recession means, even in 2009, during the GFC, global economic growth was only minus 0.1% recession. So this is many, many times worse. So I think the question that most people are asking right now is that, do we see a U-shape or a V-shape or an L-shape kind of recovery? And my answer to this is very simple. It's none of the above. We are going to see a W-shaped recovery. Why W? Because this is not an ordinary supply shock that we are seeing. This is unprecedented, and it's going to be very prolonged. So you will see some kind of recovery, which I think we are seeing a bit right now. Maybe second wave comes in, then you'll get a bit of pullback, and then they release the economy again, it will go up, and then it will come down. It won't be smooth, it won't be a straight line up, and it definitely won't be immediate. Initially, I think people were talking about a V-shaped recovery because a lot of them compared the coronavirus to SARS in 2002, sorry, I was a secretary at the time. And for SARS, it was a very different experience because it was very short-lived. It was, for Singapore's case, I think 6 or 8 months max. It was less contagious, it was very deadly. So people who got it, you make it to the hospital very quickly, and if you don't make it out, you don't pass on to anybody. For coronavirus, it's less deadly but very contagious, and it's going to be a very long, drag-out battle. So I think we can effectively rule out a V shape. At best, we are looking at a U shape, or in my case, I'm looking at a W kind of recovery. So what are the cause of all these lockdowns have been, whether it's we call it a circuit breaker or a travel restriction or a state of emergency? Undoubtedly, everything has a cause, and it's been very detrimental to every economy that has gone through this. OECD estimates that for every economy that locks down, the major economies, you lose about 1.5 to 2.5% of growth. Now let me put it to you this way, okay? For most major economies, none of them grows at more than 2% a year. So Singapore, example, last year grew at 0.7%. The US, I think, was about 2.9%, 2-ish. Eurozone is about below 1. Japan is below 1. South Korea was 1+, I think. So that means, right, the moment you have 1 month of shutdown for any of these economies, effectively, you will go into recession. And that's what this study means. And of course, for most of these countries, you're not talking about just 1 month of lockdown, you're looking at 2 or 3 months or even more. So definitely, we are looking at a very sharp drop in growth this year. So what has governments and central authorities have been doing to keep our economies afloat? Well, the first thing that most governments have done is to come out with a lot of spending to keep the economy afloat, whether it's to support the very hard-hit industries like transport and accommodation and what's the thing called, the traveling sectors, or to put money directly into the pockets of people so that they will start spending. As of the end of May, we counted $7.7 trillion. Okay, I have no idea how to even contextualize $7.7 trillion. These will have been outdated because in this week alone, we had South Korea coming in 35.3 trillion won, which is about 40 billion Sing dollars. We had Germany coming out with another 140 billion euros. So Germany was a special case. They went from frugal miser in the past to outlandish spender in a couple of months thanks to the coronavirus. And but I think in Singapore's case, we are a bit fortunate. Why I say that is because we have a lot of past reserves. Most other countries have been trying to fund their expenditures with a mixture of short and long-term borrowing, mostly bordering on the short-term borrowing. That means they have to issue a lot of debt on a national level, and that distorts their ability in terms of how they want to control interest rates and in terms of the kind of distortion they bring to their investment pictures on the private scene. But for Singapore, we do not issue a single dollar of debt for all our expenditure. We have done it via the current terms surplus, and then when it's not enough, we have touched into our past reserves. So on that front, that's why you see there's been a lot of attraction in terms of Singapore assets, Singapore bonds especially, because we are deemed as a super safe haven when other countries are tapping and borrowing and Singapore is not. So now that we are in June, I think we are seeing some signs of stabilization. Of course, when I last did the US non-farm payrolls number, it was 20 million negative number. As of last Friday, it has rebounded to 2 million. So I think that is a sign. Sorry, that's a sign that it has rebounded somewhat. But I think no other country exemplifies the rebound better than China. Take a look at some of the commodity indicators, which are normally the leading indicators for the more macro picture. When you look at the Shantung teapot refinery rate, it has gone back to pre-COVID-19 levels or even higher than those. Iron ore imports, which are used to make steel, which is in turn used to make buildings for their construction purposes, those have been rising and has been sharply above the February drawdown. Steel PMI has been above, it's the first time it's been above 50 in 12 months. So I think there are signs that some kind of normalcy has returned to China, if not a big portion of it. And it's a good thing for China to return to normal because increasingly our region, Singapore included, is dependent on China for growth. And as long as China does well, Singapore will do well. So of course, for Singapore's case, it's not as rosy as China for now for many different reasons. MPI MAS is now looking at a full year recession of -4 to -7% this year. Internally, OCBC, we think is going to be -6%, although we think it might be revised higher in the coming months. I'll explain to you in the next couple of slides why we think so. We have 3 rounds of supplementary budgets. We have 1 main budget, so 4 budgets altogether. We have ushered in the largest budget deficit in our history at 20% GDP, which is befitting because we have potentially the largest and sharpest GDP drawdown in 2020, even larger than what we saw in 2009, which was bordered on 0% growth, and the AFC, which I'm not wrong, is about -2% recession. So why am I turning more optimistic for the Singapore economy is that the manufacturing scene as well as the export scene has shown some kind of resilience and strength, surprisingly, to many of our economy's surprise. Take a look at the graph below. In the month of April, industrial production rose 13% year on year, and from January to April, manufacturing is up about 8.3% year on year. I'll be honest with you, all my forecasts for manufacturing has been negative. For me to see even 8.3% or 13% is way out of what I've expected. And why has that been the case? Single-handedly propping this whole story up is the biomedical manufacturing. And I think it is the second regard that we are a bit fortunate about, in that we have diversified to other sources other than just electronics. And we chose the right one, which is biomedical manufacturing. So in the month of April, biomanufacturing income and revenue rose by 100.5% year on year, okay, which means a double growth for a 2-time growth for the biomanufacturing cluster. This is not surprising given that there are probably a need of drugs, pharma trials around the world right now for the search for COVID-19 or just general vitamin supplements to keep people healthy. And I think Singapore has majorly benefited from this trend. To give you a context of how important the biomedical manufacturing is, manufacturing is about normally 20 to 25% of Singapore's GDP, and biomedical is, let's call it about 20 to 30% of manufacturing. So you put the two together, biomedical can account for about 5 to 8% of Singapore's GDP, which is no small feat for one single cluster, and that's why its resilience right now is keeping the Singapore economy very much alive. I like to compare our exports with the likes of Thailand. Why Thailand? Is because these two countries have a lot more in common than most people would realize. You take a look at some of the segments here. I'm not sure you can see my cursor. I'm just going to circle it here. We have electronics for Singapore. We have electronics for Thailand. They are about the same kind of performance. So generally across the board, we are seeing the same kind of performance for Singapore, Thailand, and even South Korea and Taiwan, the other two electronic heavyweights. So there are about 0% growth, slightly above 0% growth. Petrochemicals have been doing very poorly naturally because of the collapse in oil prices. Electrical appliances are here. They are generally okay, slightly below zero, but not too bad for our COVID-19 story. Machinery is also badly done, about -5% for Singapore, about -12% for Thailand. But what's the key difference between these two graphs? What does Singapore have that Thailand don't, and vice versa? We have one segment here called pharma, which is up about 45% performance exports year to date. But Thailand doesn't have that luxury of that. In return, they have something called automotives. They are a big car manufacturer in the region. And the automotive supply chain has been one of the most severely hit over the COVID-19. So even though we have a 6.8% up performance for exports January to April, Thailand has really been struggling. And this I think has been a bit beneficial to Singapore, its ability to diversify to the correct sector and the seemingly robustness in the electronics sector, as you can see over here. So if you ask me, so manufacturing looks okay, so exports looks okay, so why is Singapore still going through such a hard time? So the one that's really suffering the most right now is the retail sales segment. This is the March numbers. I know we had just the April numbers coming out on Friday, 1 p.m., which I did update, but they are there about the same picture that you see below. We estimated 35% contraction for April year on year. It came in at minus 40%. So we are pretty close in that regard. Supermarkets have done well for obvious reasons because everybody go and chong NTUC and cold storage in the lockdown period. But take a look at the end of the spectrum, okay? Clothing, F&B, departmental stores, recreational goods. Those are shockingly jaw-dropping kind of contractions that you see. To have a drop of minus 20% for recreational goods, almost half for apparel, you are going to feel the pain if you are one of those retail tenants operating in a mall. And that has been the hardest hit, and that is the main sector on top of the accommodation as well as the transport sectors that have been pulling Singapore back for COVID-19. But overall, I think Singapore is okay, is doing fine. I think minus 6%, we should revise it up sooner if we get more evidence that the manufacturing scene could hold up the overall picture. And that will have implications for asset classes, asset markets, because if your overall GDP is actually doing okay, it means people are generally not that poorly hit in terms of their wealth effect. And that could mean a translation into higher asset prices in the coming quarters, if not the next 12 months. So I think the next question that I would like to address, and I'm coming to a close right here, is that how come we have such poor economic data that has been coming in, and yet we have seen such a huge surge in this, especially over in the US. So take a look at the S&P 500. It has now broken above the 3,000 level, of course. STI, this is a bit outdated, it's a bit higher right now. If you have been reasonably long in the last 1 or 2 weeks, congratulations, you have made a ton of money. So what has happened? Why is it that the data coming in for economics is so bad? And why is the stock market and other asset classes doing so well? So take a look at the timeline that I've written over here. 3rd of March, the Federal Reserve in the US comes in, 50 basis points, unscheduled emergency meeting, cuts their interest rates. That sent a scare to the markets. It continued to fall. March 15, they came in again, 100 basis points cut, cuts their RRR to 0. Market wasn't convinced, it continued falling. And then on 17th of March, their first QE measure came in place. They decided to buy commercial paper and pump in liquidity in the repurchase market. Market was okay, somewhat stabilizing, but still not entirely convinced. But by their last day of intervention on 20th of March, they came in, they said they are going to expand their buying mandate to corporate bond, including junk bond ETFs. They said they are going to start QE infinity again, the likes of which are even bigger than what we saw in 2012. And on March 23rd, the S&P 500 hits its bottom. So is it a coincidence? Clearly it's not. Okay, a lot of this has been disrupted and distorted by central bank policies right now. If you can take a look at the graph on the bottom right, you can see the amount of money that's been pumped in by both the government, US Treasury, by the central bank, the US Federal Reserve, and for good measure, I put in the ECB there to see how the major economies are pumping money into the system. And this amount of money that's being pumped into the system, whether you're talking about the 7.7 trillion that I said earlier or the trillions of dollars from the Federal Reserve, has to find its way somewhere. So let me ask you a question. All of you all got your $600, right, from the government. How many of you all have actually spent the $600? Yeah, I can safely say I think 90 to 95% of you, the money is still sitting in the bank right now. And why is that the case? There's nowhere to spend your money. All your shops are closed, and there's a lot of apprehension right now in terms of consumption, in terms of consumer spending. So you put your money in the bank. Now, I want you to think about it on a national level. The government gives the economy $7.7 trillion. The central bank gives you a lot of money as well. It makes your way into the banks because no one is spending it. On a national level, savings means investments, and investments means there has been a surge in asset prices, and that's what we are seeing right now. So that's what we have been talking about. Although we are seeing economic reality really grim and really dreary with 20 million drop in employment in the US, which of course has rebounded to 2 million as of last Friday. We are seeing the Nasdaq having rebound 40% of its lows since March. And I think that's going to be the story, not just for the stock markets, but across asset classes, whether you're talking about corporate bonds, whether you're talking about more illiquid asset classes. So I think those money will flow into those asset classes in the coming quarters, if not months. The reality of it is that when I give you a shocking number, 20% unemployment for the US, for example, the models don't make sense of it. Markets cannot make sense of it. They just lump it as bad. And when they look at it as bad, the next thing they look at it is what comes next. And what comes next after such a shocking number has to be a good kind of improvement when you're already such a low point. And I think that's what the markets are trying to price in. How well can we recover from here? And I think so far, together with the distortion of money from central banks and governments, they are trying to price in a pretty steady recovery from here. So, but is it all rosy from here? Like I said, it's going to be a W-shaped recovery economically. And from time to time, the economic performance, the tensions, the uncertainty is going to drag asset prices there or about. It's going to drag it down a bit, it's going to let it go up a bit. In the longer term, it will rise, but I don't think we should count on a steady, gradual, straightforward, linear improvement from here, although the long-term trend does suggest it's going up. What are some of the key risks to look out for from here? US-China trade war is the next big one that's going to restart itself. Already we are seeing a bit of tensions that are rising. The US tried to ban Chinese aircraft from landing and vice versa. I won't go into the details of that. But that looks to be the first tit for tat exchange that we have been seeing since they signed the first phase deal in January. We have geopolitics. The issue of US-Iran never really went away. They just stayed quiet because the coronavirus broke out in both countries. Brexit will come back because December is the end game for Boris Johnson to come up with a plan for the EU on how to settle trade with the European bloc. We will have the return of volatility in oil prices. We might have changing consumption patterns that might usher in a different kind of preferences in terms of lifestyle habits, whether you want to stay at home to buy, whether you want to stay at home to work. I think those will be long-term disruptions to the supply chain and in terms of how we work. Other than that, do look out for potential second waves. I think that will be the other major drag back for economic performance as well as asset classes. So with that, I will end my presentation over here. I'll pass it on to Joyce, and if you have any questions, we can talk again during the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Howie. Thank you. I think this is the first time